Don't think it's soulless. I think there's a magic around this place. I feel it. I feel it home straight away.
This Michael Carrick's new United is scary. For months, Manchester United weren't short of talent, they were short of clarity. Big names, big wages, big expectations. And yet the football felt heavy. Players were being asked to adapt to the system instead of the system adapting to them. Roles blurred, confidence dipped, control disappeared. That was the era of forcing ideas. Under Ruben Amorim, United chased structure before fit. Footballers were shifted away from their natural zones. Creativity was compressed. Balance was sacrificed in the name of shape. The intention was control, but the outcome was confusion. Then Michael Carrick stepped in, quietly, calmly, without a manifesto.
Obviously, absolutely delighted the team, the spirit, the work rate, the energy, everything about that team was fantastic.
Instead of imposing philosophy, Carrick asked a different question. What actually suits these players? And almost immediately, things began to align. The midfield stopped breaking apart. Attacks stopped feeling forced. Defensive moments stopped feeling like emergencies. United weren't just running less, they were thinking better. And then came the numbers that changed the conversation. A dominant derby performance, a clean sheet against one of Europe's most dangerous attacks, clear XG superiority, multiple goals ruled out, one of the league's most feared strikers reduced to anonymity, and a team dismissed days earlier suddenly walking into the top four. This wasn't emotion, it wasn't a bounce, and it definitely wasn't luck. It was the difference between a system that demands adaptation and one that creates freedom, between a manager chasing ideals and one understanding reality. This is how Carrick quietly exposed the flaws of what came before, why this version of Manchester United is structurally stronger than the Amorim era, and why this tactical reset could define the club's season, and possibly its future. To understand why Michael Carrick's Manchester United feels different, you first have to understand why the previous structure stopped working. Under Ruben Amorim, Manchester United were not short of ideas, but they were short of fit. Amorim is a system-first coach. His football identity is rooted in rigid structures, most notably variations of a back three with wing-backs, heavy central congestion, and strict positional discipline. That approach has worked elsewhere. At Old Trafford, it exposed a fundamental problem. This squad was not built for it, and football always punishes mismatches. Let's start with the most important footballer in the squad, Bruno Fernandes.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoke to Bruno. I've known him a long time now, and I thought he was fantastic today.
Bruno is at his best between the lines, receiving on the half turn, dictating tempo in the final third, and arriving late into scoring zones. Under Amorim, Bruno spent long stretches deeper, either as a withdrawn midfielder or as a narrow inside option in a crowded central lane. His touches increased, but his influence dropped. Fewer final third receptions, fewer shots from prime areas, more responsibility, less impact. Then there's Amad Diallo. Amad's strength is clarity. Isolate him, give him a touchline or a half space, and let him attack defenders. Under Amorim's system, Amad was frequently compressed inside, operating in tight corridors with overlapping wingbacks rather than natural wingers. His dribble success remained respectable, but his chance creation dropped because the structure limited where and how he received the ball. Luke Shaw is another key example. One of the best attacking left-backs in Europe over the past decade, Shaw was regularly used as a left-sided centre-back in a back three. Defensively, he coped. Offensively, United lost one of their biggest weapons, natural width, overlaps and early progression from deep. United became narrower, slower, easier to defend. Patrick Dorg and Diogo Dalot felt this too. Both were asked to function primarily as wing-backs, meaning they had to provide width and defensive security without the natural support of a wide forward ahead of them. This often left United stretched in transition and predictable in possession, crosses without runners, overlaps without timing. In midfield, the balance suffered most. Casemiro was repeatedly exposed. In Amorim's structure, the midfield line often lacked a true positional partner alongside him, forcing Casemiro to cover large spaces laterally. His defensive numbers, tackles, interceptions stayed high, but the context changed. He was reacting, not controlling. Meanwhile, Kobbie Mainoo, one of United's most press-resistant midfielders, saw fluctuating minutes and shifting roles. Sometimes a number 8, sometimes deeper, most times unused. Rhythm matters for young midfielders. Under Amorim, rhythm was hard to find. Manchester United did not collapse under Amorim, but they plateaued. Possession often looked sterile. High central ball circulation, low penalty box access. Chance creation relied heavily on individual moments rather than repeatable patterns. Defensive structure suffered in transition due to stretched wing-back zones. Key attackers were receiving the ball further from goal. This wasn't lack of effort, it was a lack of alignment. Amorim's football demands wing-backs with elite endurance and crossing output. Mobile centre-backs comfortable defending wide. Midfielders who thrive without positional freedom. Forwards happy operating in compressed central zones. Manchester United's squad, by contrast, is built around creators, not runners, fullbacks, not wingbacks, central technicians, not rigid positional pieces. That disconnect is why performances often felt laboured, even when results were acceptable. Players weren't failing, they were being asked to be different players, and that's why Carrick's arrival matters, because what follows is not a tactical revolution, it's something more dangerous, a system that finally fits the footballers. What Michael Carrick did in his first derby as head coach of Manchester United wasn't loud or theatrical, it was calm, measured, smart. Against Manchester City, Carrick didn't arrive with a manifesto or try to force a new ideology onto the squad. He did something far more effective. He looked at the players he had, understood what they were comfortable doing, and built a structure that supported them. Within 90 minutes, the difference was obvious. United lined up in a 4-2-3-1, a shape the club knows well and one the players instinctively understand. But this wasn't the rigid, flat version we've seen before. Without the ball, the team settled into a compact mid-block that often resembled a narrow 4-5-1. With the ball, the shape breathed. Fullbacks moved forward only when it made sense. The midfield stayed connected, transitions were protected. The biggest change was spacing. Distances between players were shorter, passing lanes were cleaner, movements felt coordinated rather than improvised. For the first time in a while, United looked like a team where everyone knew not just their role, but where their teammates would be next. At the back, there was no obsession with pushing high or forcing risky build-up patterns. The centre-backs stayed disciplined, focused on protecting the middle of the pitch rather than stepping out aggressively. The fullbacks picked their moments to advance instead of being permanently stationed high up the pitch. That alone blunted City's biggest weapon. Erling Haaland was starved of space, limited to very few meaningful touches in the box, because United defended the centre first and refused to be dragged wide unnecessarily. Everything, though, was built on the midfield. The pairing of Casemiro and Kobbie Mainoo gave United control they've lacked for much of the season. Casemiro was no longer firefighting across huge spaces. He screened, intercepted and organised, doing the job he has mastered over his career. Mainoo played alongside him as a natural connector, calm under pressure, always available for the ball and clever in how he moved it forward. United didn't dominate possession, but they dictated the rhythm. They slowed the game when they needed to, sped it up when opportunities appeared, and crucially, they were never stretched through the middle. That balance allowed the attacking players ahead of them to play with freedom rather than anxiety. That freedom was most obvious in Bruno Fernandes. Instead of being dragged deep or overloaded with defensive responsibility, Bruno operated where he hurts teams most, between midfield and attack. When United defended, he tucked in intelligently. When they broke forward, he was immediately available in dangerous pockets. His touches were cleaner, his decisions sharper, and his influence on the opening goal came from timing and positioning rather than forcing the play. Carrick's boldest decision was pushing Bryan Mbeumo into a central role. Rather than acting as a traditional striker, Mbeumo became a constant moving target, attacking the space behind City's high line and dragging defenders out of shape. His runs created room for others, his work rate set the tone for transitions, and his goal was the reward for intelligent movement rather than brute force. Out wide, Amad Diallo finally played with clarity. He stayed wide, received the ball in space, and was encouraged to take defenders on rather than drifting into crowded central areas. Even with a goal ruled out for offside, the threat was clear. When Amad is isolated against a fullback, United become unpredictable and dangerous. Then there was Patrick Dogu, whose performance summed up Carrick's pragmatism. Instead of being asked to live high up the pitch as a wing-back, Dog picked his moments. He arrived late. He attacked space when it opened. That's how he scored. Unmarked, decisive, efficient. His recent run of goal contributions makes sense in this system because he isn't overloaded or confused. His role is simple, and simplicity breeds confidence. What stood out just as much was how composed United looked defensively. There was no reckless pressing, no frantic chasing of City's centre-backs. United screened passing lanes, forced play into wide areas, and waited patiently for the right moments to engage. As a result, City were limited to low-quality chances. Phil Foden struggled to find space. Haaland was isolated. Service into the box was inconsistent and predictable. This wasn't defensive fear, it was defensive intelligence. In a single match, Carrick restored clarity to roles, balance to the midfield, structure to the attack, and compactness to the defence. More than anything, he restored belief. United didn't look like a group trying to learn a new system on the fly. They looked like a group relieved to be playing football that made sense to them. And that's why this matters, because this didn't feel like a one-off. It felt like the beginning of something sustainable. A Manchester United built around its players, not forced into a shape that doesn't suit them. Carrick's biggest advantage: he doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. He just needs to get the best out of the players already at Old Trafford. And really, the whole next phase comes down to one simple question: how do you squeeze more goals, more control, and more week-to-week reliability out of the same squad? Let's start up front with Joshua Zirkzee and Benjamin Šeško. Zirkzee isn't your typical penalty box poacher. He's more like the guy who makes everyone around him better, dropping deep, linking play, acting as that wall you can bounce passes off when you're trying to break through a tight defence. United's own scouting report basically says he can play as a 9 or a 10, which tells you everything. He's the kind of forward who helps you play through pressure, not just finish moves. That fits perfectly with how Carrick likes to play. His teams don't usually dominate possession for the sake of it. They move the ball cleanly, find the striker early, connect, then boom, runners, flood forward into the next phase. Šeško? Completely different animal. He's your classic target man, runs in behind, commands space in the box, makes centre-backs actually worry about getting beaten over the top. And here's the smart part: Carrick already showed he won't just auto-start him. He benched Šeško for the derby, and reports called it a tactical decision, not a punishment. That tells you Carrick sees the striker spot as something you adjust based on the opponent, not a name you pencil in every week. Sometimes Zirkzee's link-up play cracks teams open. Other times, Šeško's ability to stretch defences is what you need. Now add Matheus Cunha and Mason Mount into the mix, and things get really interesting. Cunha's numbers already suggest he's capable of more than he's currently delivering. He's got 4 Premier League goals from about 5 expected goals, so he's finishing at a decent rate. And he's heavily involved in build-up, nearly 500 passes at 82% accuracy. But he's not some touchline winger waiting for crosses. He's a guy who wants to get into central scoring areas and shoot from dangerous spots. According to Premier League analyst Adrian Clark, Carrick could deploy him from the left-centre channel or even centrally as a 10 at times, because Carrick wants that attacking midfielder constantly breaking into the box. Mount's the glue that holds it together. He gives you energy, pressing, and the ability to play as a proper two-way midfielder when Carrick wants three in the middle, or as a second playmaker if the team needs more creativity between the lines. Clark mentions a potential Christmas tree setup where Mount operates just ahead of the holding mid, still able to burst into the box when the opportunity comes. Even his disallowed goal in the derby showed the pattern. Carrick wants runners arriving at pace, not players standing around waiting for the perfect pass. Get those rotations right, and United become a nightmare to defend. The danger doesn't come from one predictable area, it comes in waves. One forward drops, another runs. One attacking mid arrives, a central mid overlaps. One wide player holds width while another cuts inside. It's constantly shifting. The same thinking applies to Diogo Dalot, a player who can look average when he's confused about his role, but genuinely excellent when he knows exactly what he's supposed to do. Carrick's system typically has one full-back push forward while the other tucks in for balance, creating a back three shape when you've got the ball. That's straight from the Premier League's tactical breakdown of Carrick's approach. For Dalot, that means two different versions of himself, the disciplined one who sits deeper and protects against counters when the other side attacks. The overlapping runner who bombs forward and hits the byline when the game plan is to overload one flank. And that clarity matters, especially since Dalot's been involved in some high-profile moments lately, like that challenge on Jeremy Doku in the derby that had everyone talking. Simplifying his decision-making helps. Carrick's system protects him by reducing those chaotic one-on-one situations in open space. Now the centre-backs, because if Carrick's going to make United consistently dangerous, the foundation has to be rock solid. That's where Matthijs de Ligt, Lenny Yoro, and Aiden Heaven come in. De Ligt is the kind of defender you build a stable team around. Experienced, organised, wins his battles. He even won United's Player of the Month for November, which shows his best form is already visible at the club. The issue right now? Availability. He missed the derby through injury. But when he's fit, Carrick can use him as the anchor. The guy who holds the defensive line, wins first contacts, and keeps everything steady when the team pushes forward. Yoro's a different type. He's the modern defender. Quick recovery speed, aggressive defending, confidence stepping up into space. If Carrick wants United back in the Champions League mix consistently, defenders like Yoro are essential. They let you defend higher up the pitch without constantly worrying about getting burned over the top. Heaven's the young wildcard with potential. United's brought him into the first team picture, and the smart move is controlled minutes. Cup games, specific matchups, situations where he's not being thrown into chaos. Carrick built his reputation at Middlesbrough on clear instructions and repeatable patterns. Exactly the kind of environment where young defenders thrive because they're not forced to figure everything out on the fly every single week. Put it all together and you can see the real Carrick effect forming. Zirkzee becomes the connector who helps United play through pressure. Šeško becomes the vertical threat who forces defences to drop deeper. Cunha becomes the attacking midfielder whose underlying numbers scream more goals coming. Mount becomes the runner who turns possession into actual penalty box danger. Dalot becomes a player with a clear role instead of someone constantly improvising. De Ligt and Yoro become the foundation that lets United attack without fear when they're fit. And Heaven becomes a development project with a plan, not just an emergency option. That's how you go from one good performance to something sustainable. You don't blow everything up, you just make everyone's job clearer and let the system do more of the heavy lifting instead of asking individuals to be heroes every week. This is what makes the Michael Carrick era at Manchester United feel different, and why it should command attention. Not because United suddenly look perfect, not because one derby win guarantees anything, but because for the first time in a long while, the direction makes sense. Carrick isn't chasing an abstract philosophy. He's building a framework that serves the players, not the other way around. Roles are clearer, strengths are amplified, weaknesses are protected. And that is how teams stop swinging between extremes and start becoming reliable. The real test isn't what happens next weekend, it's what this looks like over months. Because if Michael Carrick keeps choosing fit over ego, balance over chaos, and football intelligence over ideology, then Manchester United may not be rebuilding anymore. They may already be back on the path, quietly, methodically, and far more seriously than people realise.